Since I began reading in earnest way back in 2020, I have read close to over 250 books so far. Now, since you have clicked on this video, let me assume that you are someone new to the entire prospect of reading as a hobby, and so you want to know what all this fuss is about. So let me guide you through this from the lens of my own experience, and let's begin. So how will this video proceed? Firstly, I'm going to talk about why I think reading is a worthwhile hobby. Then we'll go around to different categories of books and a few of my recommendations for each of them. And then we'll see where we go from there. Then why should you read a book in the first place? Well, there's a lot you could really do with your time, from music to gaming and every form of media in between. And exposing yourself to different forms of content can really be fulfilling. More common here is that we are overwhelmed with the same few kinds of infinite scroll traps of Instagram and YouTube shorts and what. Why not take a break, free from those algorithms, and look into the pages which do not change based on engagement metrics? Where books. I'm not going to claim that reading has cured every single internet-related habit of mine. I still have some problems there. But it has certainly helped a lot over the last few years, and I hope it will have a similar transformative effect on you. Why not give it a fair try? Now, how do we categorize books? There are two broad categories, fiction and non-fiction. Now, fiction deals primarily with the imaginary world, where some or all of the story might be made up, but often it portrays a much deeper reality through its stories than reality itself. Into seeing reality within the context of the unreal, then fiction is your domain. Next up, we have non-fiction. Now, that deals with everything else. Is your scholarly articles and your journal papers, your memoirs and your eagle-eye view of history. Is where you take copious notes to learn from the experience of real life. Talk about some of my recommendations for fiction books. Now, I primarily read fantasy nowadays, so it has an indelible effect on my reading habits. Fantasy, there is this one trilogy that I recommend to almost everyone I know, and it has guaranteed to lead many people who otherwise were not readers into being serious readers themselves. Series of books is Mistborn Trilogy 1. Now, through this series, I have been able to convince my non-reader friends to read, and most of them ended up being bigger bookworms than myself, even finishing some more books of the Cosmere series before even I could. So now they are ahead of me. It deals with the story of Vin, our protagonist, who has had a really rough life, but suddenly she is caught up in a conspiracy that is beyond her wildest dreams. And through that, she learns a lot about herself, her powers, and where that leads us is a beautiful story of romance, of action, of passion, and of revenge. The simple yet highly interesting system of allomancy has been one of the most original works of fantasy magic mechanics that I have seen in a long time. And well, that's pretty much the hallmark of the writer Brandon Sanderson. He's known for creating many original and highly interesting magic systems for all his different stories. Even make an entire trilogy out of the plot of just the first book, but then we get two more just as a bonus. So I don't want to spoil anything for you, and it's better if you just read the book for yourself. Moving on to number 2, we have Lord of the Rings. Many of you have seen the movies of Lord of the Rings, which are considered the best movie adaptations of any book so far, and for very good reason. Now, where I began with this series is The Hobbit. I took it up as a light read because I found the story of Bilbo very childlikely innocent, though there were many different metaphors and hidden meanings behind the world building. I missed up on most of those when I first read the book. Childlike wonder and sense of adventure in The Hobbit, to the crazy stakes and sense of dread in The Lord of the Rings. From the treasure in The Hobbit to the fate of the world in The Lord of the Rings. The ring that gives you invisibility to the ring that ruins lives and controls them for centuries. Characters change, how we see the world changes, and yet the world itself remains ever the same, posing new and old challenges to our heroes as they make their way across the vast lands, trying their best to fight a power that is well beyond finite existences. Now, since its release, it has given rise to a lot of theories and how it can be a metaphor for almost everything under the sun, from World War II to Nazism to many other things. But can be a metaphor for countless things. Let us return to what Tolkien himself says, that it does not matter what it is a metaphor of, and he himself did not plan it to be a metaphor of anything consciously. But what matters is that fantasy and this book itself, this series itself, has a lot more to offer even beyond just a metaphor for real life. It was a very enjoyable read for me, to say the least. Now, moving on to things that are a bit more lightweight, yet all the more impactful. The Importance of Being Earnest by Oscar Wilde. Well, I haven't read much other plays except for a lot of Shakespeare, so my context for comedic timings in the realm of plays is very limited. But throughout that, I have found that this play is one of the funniest that I've ever read. I read this in the audiobook format and it got really confusing at times to differentiate between different characters because they were not voiced very differently. But if you are reading it, then I believe you can have a very clear separation of the dialogues, and that will only add to the experience of it. Moving on to my favorite book of all time, or rather a series of short novels, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. Have you ever wondered what is the answer to the life, universe, and everything? Just a note, that question is actually wrong. What happens at the end of the universe in both space and time? And do they serve dessert there? That and many more questions, the answers to which only exist to leave you with more questions, are present in this book. About it all, there is just one Arthur Dent putting a dent in the fabric of reality itself. Now moving on to nonfiction, I have 3 recommendations for you, and each one holds a very special place in my heart. First book is a memoir called Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. This is the book where my entire audiobook journey began. Way back in 2020, when my eyes were tired from reading ebooks all the time, I thought, why not try an audiobook, right? And this was the first that I listened to. Trevor Noah's beautifully written, poignantly funny, and even more beautifully narrated life story, narrated by Trevor himself. It was just a joy to read. It was amazingly funny, filled with sudden moments that just drop you from the comic heights of his antics to the absolute horror-laden reality of his day-to-day life back in apartheid South Africa. Is the reason that I have listened to nearly 100 audiobooks since then and have never looked back. Moving on to the second book in my recommendation, that is The Lessons of History by Will and Ariel Durant. I have read several different broad outlines of histories throughout the years, and out of them I find this book to be particularly comprehensive. It is also possible that my reading of this book is tinted by my previous experiences reading several similar books, because I took for granted a lot of details which is presented here in maybe a little offhand manner. So I read it in a very fast and distracted way, but even then I learned a lot about the different stories of the Western philosophy and histories. And once you have a primer and broad strokes of history through all these things, then you can go in depth into the larger tomes, such as the original works of historians from decades and centuries ago, or even the story of civilization, which is a very massive multi-part, multi-volume book authored by the same pair, and it is truly considered one of the classics of 20th century history non-fiction books. The last book that I'm going to recommend deals mainly with the idea that we are consuming too much content. So this book was written decades ago, decades before the internet became a thing. It spoke about the television and how it floods us with so much information that we do not know what to be affected by anymore. This reality is even more exacerbated by today's social media driven world, where it is completely impossible, or rather extremely difficult, to know which news to care about, which leads to a general sense of apathy for the masses. I would like to quote just one thing from this book, which in turn is an idea about things written much before, and it goes as follows. Orwell feared were those who would ban books. What Huxley feared was that there would be no reason to ban a book, for there would be no one who wanted to read one. Even though I read a lot of books, I do believe that there is a lot of worthwhile contribution that YouTube videos and TV shows can make to a greater understanding of our world for the masses. Then, this book made me reconsider a lot of things I thought about media in all forms. And as for my actions, I don't think just being aware of how messed up all this has made a profound enough difference for me. But that has to change for me and for you once you read this book. This might get a bit too ranty for a lot of us Gen Z people, because we grew up with technology all around us. But then it's a classic that I believe everyone should read at least once whenever a new paradigm shift in how we consume media occurs in our world. Well, even though I have talked about all this, I haven't mentioned all the comics that I have read, both Western and Japanese, which I do believe hold their own place as literature itself. A different topic altogether, right? So I've told you why I think you should read a book, and then I have given you 7 recommendations from my end. Now, what can you do from here on out? You can check out my blog in the description below. That blog forms the basis of most of what I have spoken in these videos. I have been trying to keep a regular blog of all the different books I have read, and that forms the basis of what I speak about in this first video of mine. I would like to leave you with just one last thought. Even if you do not meet some arbitrary yearly goals of X books, even if you fall back into the scrolling trap, you can always get back on track and try again. Thousands of worlds out there waiting to be explored right between you. Now go out there and open a book.